Welcome to Behind the Prop podcast, where each week we will bring you stories, lessons, and some tips from behind the prop. Please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Pre-show checklist. Microphones.
Check.
Sound check.
Complete.
Recording all channels.
Checked and verified. Pre-show checklist complete.
Tower. Bravo Tango Papa is holding short, ready for departure.
Bravo Tango Papa, you are clear for takeoff. Have a great show.
You're clear for takeoff and Wilco. Bravo Tango Papa.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you today?
I'm good. Today is our first guest appearance on Behind the Prop. Today we have Pat Brown with us. He is the Texas You Can Fly ambassador and has been, I hope, a friend of mine for a number of years now. I think he's been a friend of Wally's for many years, and hopefully he'll be a longtime friend of the show. Welcome to the show, Pat.
Thank you a lot, Bobby. I appreciate that, Wally. Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Yes. So we're going to talk about a number of topics today, but more importantly, I was a pilot for a number of years, and I was thinking this morning, I didn't know who you were until I bought the flight school and someone said I needed to meet you, right? So I was a pilot for a number of years, didn't really know what a Texas You Can Fly ambassador was, but we went to lunch. I learned a lot, learned about resources. Tell us a little bit about what you do for aviation, what you do for the AOPA, and kind of give pilots that are listening today something that they should do as it relates to the AOPA.
Well, I'm sure pretty much everybody knows AOPA stands for the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, and it's a large advocacy group in Washington, actually in Frederick, Maryland. Safety is a big deal. We advocate for our right to fly, to be quite honest with you. But the division that I work for is called the You Can Fly division. We have pretty much four legs to the stool, if you will. One is we help get rusty pilots back in the air. So your listeners, some of them could very well have been at a rusty pilot or two that we've actually done here or somewhere else in the city. We help flight schools. I know you and Matt attended a kind of a beta testing thing that we did a while back to help flight schools up their customer service game. So we're developing some tools for flight schools in that regard. We help people start flying clubs in the state of Texas. In the last 4.5 years, we've helped start, I think the number is 22, maybe 23 flying clubs. I got about a half a dozen of them in the works right now that haven't yet gotten active. And then fourth, we work with high schools. AOPA has we're about to complete the fourth year of a 4-year curriculum that's given free to qualifying high schools around the country for kids that want to start a career in aviation. So it's a full 4-year curriculum. It's quite involved. LSIC here locally in town uses that curriculum. They've just instituted that curriculum, and it's been quite successful. Again, it's free of charge, and all of those things that we do are funded by donations for those people who are AOPA members. Not one penny of that annual dues that they pay, anywhere between $59 and $79, depending on a number of things, goes to pay my salary, to operate the airplane that I'm provided to fly around and promote what we do. Not a penny of that. So it's all donor money.
Nice. And I understand Wally and Pat might have known each other long before the AOPA and the aviation connection. Wally, share a little bit with us about how you and Pat worked together before you were both working together as pilots.
Yeah, it's an interesting road that we've traveled together. Pat and I both worked in the music industry, and I started a business. Of course, I'm an airline pilot, is my day job, but I started a business in the music industry, basically manufacturing mallets for percussion instruments, marimbas, vibraphones, that sort of stuff. And Pat worked for a major corporation, actually at the time, I believe was the world's largest manufacturer of drumsticks.
Yep, that's right.
Located right here in Houston, Texas. And so through our dealings together, mutual friends, a lot of time spent at trade shows. I met Pat, and we had a good relationship. And one day, a mutual friend of ours said, so do you and Pat ever talk about flying? And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, he's a pilot. He's a glider pilot. And I said, no, I didn't know that. So I walked over him and I said, Pat, I understand you're a glider pilot. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, I'm an airline pilot. And so I said, I fly around with the engines running, and you fly around with the engines off. And so we became, just another bond for us. And we kept in touch about that. And then, a long story short, his company actually ended up buying my company through another person. And, the relationship became even a little bit closer. And then Pat got out of that and got in aviation full time. And now we are DPE colleagues and don't really work together, but we
commiserate.
We talk and we text. And when I run into something that I don't know the answer to, he's one of my go-to guys, and he does the same for me. So it's very interesting that we're working together like we were in a totally different industry.
It's a small world. It is really a small world, and if people don't realize that, they don't have their eyes open.
They haven't been around long.
Yeah.
Because it is amazing how small this world is. I think one of our first couple shows we talked about you administering my instrument check, right? And who would have ever thought we would be in this same building 3 years later doing a show like this, along with a guy that worked with you together on drumsticks and things. So that's crazy how we've all been connected.
I will say a very kind of a funny story. Me being a drummer, we drive down the road, and my two daughters, my two favorite bands in the world are the Beatles and Chicago, and so they know the drummers for those two bands. And so a Beatles song comes on, and I'll say to my daughter, who's the drummer? Of course, they'll say Ringo. And Pat was doing a seminar. This is probably about 6 years ago. And I don't even remember what the seminar was, but I was going to go to it. And my oldest daughter was just getting into flying. And I said, Michelle, you want to go to this seminar with me? And she didn't seem too interested. And I said, Michelle, the guy who is going to teach this knows Ringo. And she immediately said, let's go. So she wanted to meet Pat because Pat knows Ringo Starr.
Pat knows a lot of stars. I've seen his posts on Facebook. He knows a lot of stars.
You mentioned Chicago. Danny Seraphin is the drummer, was the original founding drummer for Chicago. And I met Danny, it's been probably close to 40 years ago when I first met Danny. So we've known each other over the years. And the very first time I met him was at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo when Chicago played the rodeo.
I remember that.
And in the dressing room afterwards, he had actually broken a cymbal, cracked it. And in the dressing room afterwards, he handed me that cymbal with an autograph on it, and it's framed at the house. I've got a lot of that kind of memorabilia at the house. I've got a signed cymbal from Phil Collins. Phil was when they was with Genesis. They did remember when the blimp bass was up near
they rehearsed here.
They rehearsed Genesis. It was the only indoor venue that they could find big enough to hold their lighting rig. And Phil was in charge of the lighting, and he invited us to come up just to hang out one day, and showed up unannounced and with my wife and my daughter. And he was so nice and visited with us for a little bit, and then invited us back for the dress rehearsals. And so my wife and my daughter and my boss at the time and his wife, the five of us, I guess it was the five of us, showed up on the appointed day, got to watch 2 full-length run-throughs on the Genesis concert that later played the Astrodome some months later. And after that, he brought down one of the cymbals and put a little stick figure on it and signed it, and I've got that framed at the house too. So there's a lot of that kind of memorabilia floating around the house, which is kind of fun to go back and reminisce on.
So I've seen a lot of your rock and roll historical photos and memorabilia on Facebook as well. And as we think about the AOPA and the work you're doing now, that didn't just happen overnight either, right? You owned a flight school, have done 5,000 plus hours of dual flight instruction, now are a designated pilot examiner.
Cheated death.
I'm sure you have. We talked, that was last week's episode or a week or two ago, myself.
Yeah. Well, I started flying when I was 16 years old, so this isn't like a new hobby. And I got my private when I was 17. I got my commercial at 18, and then went to college and got married. You know, it's the whole story about all of a sudden flying takes kind of a back seat. And I was a rusty pilot myself for about 8 or 9 years, and came back and got my tailwheel endorsement, got my instrument rating, got my glider certificate rating, became a glider CFI, and then just began to gradually add CFI stuff along the way. And towards the tail end of my tenure at ProMark, a business partner and I decided we start a flight school specializing in light sport, because this was right at the cusp of the light sport thing. And I thought, there's some legs here. And we were actually very, very successful with that, because we had people coming to us who would call a flight school, and they would get kind of a, you don't want to go light sport route. You want to be a real pilot, And well, no, they really did want to be a light sport. And so we did actually quite well with that. Through that, I got involved with AOPA, and eventually began doing some local safety seminars under their tutelage, and then got a national contract to do the ASI Air Safety Institute seminars that we do twice a year, at least we did pre-COVID. Through that, I met some other folks. The You Can Fly team was just beginning to be put together again. I got approached and asked if I'd write the Rusty Pilot Seminar along with another colleague of mine. So we did the original version of the Rusty Pilot Seminar, tested that. It looked like that was going to be successful. So headquarters took the bones that we had put together and fleshed it out to what is now the Rusty Pilot Seminar that you've seen us do several times, Bobby, and that we're doing now virtually. And then they came and they said, we've got this idea for these ambassadors. So it's only 5 of us around the country for the purpose of promoting these 4 things that we talked about earlier. And would you be interested? And to be quite honest with you, I had to think twice about that, because I'd been my own boss now at that point for several years, and didn't know if I wanted to go back and have to deal with metrics and those kind of things. And anyway, long story made probably too long, was that eventually I said, yeah, I think that could sound that sounds fun. And here, almost 5 years later, it'll be 5 years in December, and we've started, I think, 22 or 23 flying clubs in the state of Texas. AOPA nationwide has gotten, I think the number is now close to 9,000 rusty pilots back in the air. It's been gratifying. It's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. And I love the AOPA, and I mostly because of the Flight Training Magazine. I think that's the most valuable resource in the world for a subscription that you're paying for a lot of other things with the AOPA. Not only the magazine subscription, but I use the medical services every year.
Right.
I take high blood pressure medicine, and I make sure every year before I go take my medical that nothing's changed on those meds, and that I'm going to be okay. I think there's so many resources that people don't realize what all the AOPA does, and I definitely was on the side of that before I bought a flight school, and I think people need to be educated a little bit more about that.
One of the real hidden gems that people don't really understand is the Pilot Information Center, PIC. And if there's a question that a pilot has, if we can't answer it, you don't need to know the answer. It's one of those kind of deals. It really, there is a depth of knowledge by the staff at the PIC that's unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. They have resources at their fingertips and can answer the most obscure questions, usually when you're on the phone with them. If they can't answer it when you're on the phone with them, they'll call you back, and they will have researched it chapter and verse and be able to point to the periods and the commas and the and the exclamation points and give you an answer to whatever the question is that you can hang your hat on and take to whoever you need to take to. So the PIC is a real hidden treasure that a lot of people don't really understand. And
that's included in the membership, right? There's no fees. You don't have to pay anybody. This is also not a offshore call center. These are passionate pilots that are answering these questions.
And these people know what they're talking about. I call them. If I'm frustrated looking up things in the FARs, Wally knows as well as you do that sometimes you're trying to find something in the regs that just boy, where is it? And I'll call and just tell them I give up. Tell
Well,
me
I'm not a
where it
DP.
is.
I swear. Sometimes I can read the same paragraph 3 times, and I have convinced myself of 3 different answers. I'm not the most prolific when it comes to legalese, so I'm like, I do get frustrated, and I do have someone translate that for me from time to time.
I'll give you a perfect example. This was I was doing a check ride at a local flight school, not this one, and the question came up on a flight review, the 24 calendar month thing, right? And if you go and look at the regs, and I'd have to have them in front of me to be able to quote it exactly, but it says something about 24 calendar months prior to the month in which you intend to do the flight, or it's some really convoluted language. And I thought, well, gosh, if you take it the way that it looks like it's read, that it's written, then it's you could be illegal if you had your flight review on June the 1st and it's June the 30th, 24 calendar months later. I'm trying to remember what the reasoning was, but like you're actually,
It might not be the end of the month. You're saying.
well, let's say it's July the 1st.
Right.
You're illegal, but so I called headquarters and said, I'm not sure how to interpret this. And they said, well, basically you don't count the month in which you do the flight review. So June is month 0, July is month 1, and that gives you to the end of June, 24 calendar months hence. I think that's the way it was. I may be screwing this up a little bit, because I don't remember all the details of the conversation. But the bottom line is you don't count the month that you do it in as month 1.
Gotcha.
It's month 0.
Well, sometimes I just wish they'd say 365 days. Sure seems like that'd be a lot easier. But
Yeah.
someone would be complaining about, is today the 364th or the 5th?
Well, it's
We
like
would
your
still be
driver's
debating.
license that expires on your birthday, no matter what the day of the month is.
Right.
And I think it's much easier the way the FAA does it, because it's just the end of the month, and that's just really easy. But anyway, that's just me, and I don't get the big bucks.
Yeah. And Pat, so one of the things that comes to mind when I think of you in this AOPA position is the airplane you get to fly around in. Which affectionately, I'm not sure who named it, if you named it, but it's named Woodstock. And of course, to me, Woodstock is a rock and roll festival that happened in upstate New York in the summer of 1969. But maybe that's not the intent of the name. So tell us about the airplane.
Well, it's a tricked out Cessna 152. It's got a IFR certified Garmin 650 in it. It's got a Garmin 345 transponder, ADS-B out and in, Bluetooth weather to my iPad, and traffic as well. No autopilot. I've been lobbying for an autopilot, but nope. So far, no luck there. I call it Woodstock, not because of that, although I wasn't there, but I do remember Woodstock. I'm old enough. But because of the Peanuts character, Charles Schultz and the little yellow bird. And so I named it Woodstock because it's painted yellow, brightly yellow. You can't miss it. In fact, I remember one of the first times I flew into Dallas in Woodstock. And I was flying into, I think it was Grand Prairie, and I'm on short final, and there's this silver tail dragger waiting to take off behind me. It's a towered field up there. And as I'm on short final, the guy over the mic says, "Is that Woodstock?" And, yep, that's me. And so it's gotten to be actually quite well known around the state. I was flying into Fort Worth last year, and I called up. I know one of the controllers up there, Matt Wells, used to be here in Houston, and I know one of the controllers at him there at Meacham. And I'm getting handed off by approach control, and I call him up and I say, "Meacham Tower, Cessna 103 Uniform Charlie," whatever my distance was, and he says, "Woodstock." He says, "You're cleared to land."
Yeah.
So,
Well, I've taken my own photos with Woodstock, and
yes, you have.
there's quite the following of friends of Woodstock.
You're an
so
FOW. You're a friend of Woodstock.
It's a big deal.
Yes,
It's a big deal.
Yes, you are. I think you are too, Wally. I think
I am.
you're an FOW. So yeah, that's an exclusive club that anybody can join.
So I'm sure our listeners would love any kind of feedback DPs have. I think before we started recording, we talked a little bit about pet peeves. They don't have to be check ride pet peeves, but let's hear maybe a couple of pet peeves from both the DPs, just about aviation in general. Again, not a disclaimer on check rides, but just something that drives you nuts that you wish pilots knew better, and let's maybe educate them a little bit in the last 10 minutes of the show.
Well, it's interesting because before we even started the show, we were just having a casual conversation, and I think Pat and I are both on the pet peeve bandwagon of radio etiquette. And what I try to explain to applicants, you know, a lot of the applicants that we deal with are people who are pursuing a career in aviation, and you know, you're probably not going to spend your whole aviation career flying within the continental United States. So you're going to be talking to controllers whose native language is something other than English, and they have of course, we're supposed to speak English on the radio worldwide, and most places do.
Unless you're in Louisiana. Of course.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But you could be it could be the middle of the night, and you're over the Amazon down in Brazil. You're talking to a controller whose native language is Portuguese and knows very little English, maybe some aviation-based English. And so when we start using slang and that sort of things, I had a check ride the other day that the young man was a law enforcement officer, and he was using a lot of cop slang over the radio. And I was talking to him about that. I says, you know, maybe a better way of saying that you see the traffic is in sight rather than I have eyes on the traffic. I think that's a cop thing. I've watched enough TV to say I have eyes on the suspect. And so you know, it was things like that. You know, that was not a big deal. He was talking to a local controller here at Hooks Airport, and he knew exactly what he meant. So there was not a breakdown in communication, but there could be. So radio etiquette, you know, doing it exactly right, you know, level it 10,000. Well, for a little bit extra effort, you can say level at 10,000, which is actually the 100% correct way to do it.
Yeah, and they're not a sponsor of the show, but I just recently found an app called Plain English. I don't know if y'all have heard this app. It's on the iPad and iPhone, but it is a app that you can read off. It'll put on the screen 10000, and it'll ask you to read it off the way a pilot should read it off. And if you say 10,000, it scores you as a 0 because that's absolutely incorrect. But if you read it off 10,000, it's like green. Very similar to a how to speak Spanish app that might be grading you. There's an aviation app. So if you're struggling with how to use the radios, there's a really cool app that I found that I started sharing. The free version probably has everything through a private pilot rating that they might need to know, but you can get commercial type stuff that it's the 10,000 and much more. So something, if you're listening, you might want to go download Plain English. It's a free app on the App Store, which I thought was pretty cool. And then the last thing I'll say to that point is when I was probably even an instrument pilot, hate to admit this, I didn't know where to go find these right things out, but there's a book for this, right? Like, and a book you don't have to buy. It's called the AIM.
Exactly.
And I think as much as we spend time in the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge and the Airplane Flying Handbook, and we want to solo and we want to fly so bad that we don't know where to necessarily turn to, this communication stuff's clearly articulated in the AIM. So just search the Google for AIM, and I'm sure you'll find all your correct ATC language and things you should say.
You know, to Wally's point, even air traffic controllers who are by and large are awesome will fall into climb and maintain 10,000, and you'll hear that a lot. 10,000. I hear a lot of pilots say I'm leaving 8.5 for 2.5 or something like that. And occasionally I'll hear controllers do the same thing. They don't say 2,500 feet or 8,500 feet. You know, it's just one of those things, I guess, you know.
Well, Pat, we talked a little bit about pet peeves. What's your big pet peeve? And maybe we can teach something here too.
Anybody listening to this that knows me knows what's coming. One for me is taking the active. Cessna 103 Uniform Charlie, taking the active. And my first thought is, well, where are you taking it? And when are you going to bring it back? Because I'm going to need it pretty soon.
Exactly.
And, so I make a joke about it, but, the bigger issue is that taking the active doesn't tell me as a pilot, particularly one that's coming into land at that non-towered field, it doesn't tell me anything. It tells me you're getting ready to take off, but it doesn't tell me on what runway you're getting ready to take off. And if you go to Palacios, for example, or back in the day before San Marcos and New Braunfels, which have 3 runways before they had a control tower, oftentimes over in that part of the country, down in Palacios, the wind can be in such a direction that any two of those 3 runways could be the active runway, or actually more appropriately, the runway in use. But when you say active runway, you're not telling me that you're taking off on runway 13 or you're taking off on runway 27. I don't know that. Same thing with clear of the active. It doesn't tell me anything. So it's much better to say I'm taking off runway 15 or departing runway 15. Now somebody the other day says, well, wait a minute, doesn't departing mean that you've run off the runway? And I said, well, that could be interpreted that way. So perhaps taking off runway 15 would be better. But that way, if I'm flying in somewhere, from somewhere, and I hear someone saying, I'm taking off runway 15, okay, so I'm listening to the AWAS or the ASOS, as the case may be. I'm probably figuring that 15 is the right runway to use, but somebody's just confirmed that by using the more proper phraseology. Any traffic in the area, please advise, is one of the others that for me is like fingernails on a chalkboard. If you read AIM chapter 4.1.9, you may say, well, how does he know that? It's not a geek thing, but I stumbled across that one time. And that chapter, AIM 4.1.9, actually says that any traffic in the area, please advise, is not a recognized radio phrase. It's a phraseology. Incorrect phraseology should not be used under any circumstances. Yet you hear it all the time, and it propagates itself. You have somebody that uses incorrect phraseology. Last call is another one that seems to have popped up.
That was what I was going to ask both of y'all about. Like, what's your opinion? What's the regs say? Because I don't really know. But every time I fly with the CFI at a non-controlled airport, I ask them, what's your opinion on this? Because I hear it all the time. I've been known to say it maybe a time or two, but I don't do anymore. What's y'all's opinion?
What say you, Wally?
Both of those calls, any traffic, please advise, or last call, to me what that says is that the pilot who just said that is not looking out anymore. He is taking the burden of looking for traffic, and he's deflecting it to someone else. If I'm coming in or someone's coming in and I hear him say, 5 miles east inbound for landing, any traffic, please advise. I almost feel like if they don't hear anything, they're just going to take carte blanche and do whatever in the world they want to do. Same with last call. Last call is, I'm out of here, I've checked out, I'm not looking. So just mentally, I think that's what it's saying, is that I'm not paying attention anymore. I could be wrong.
No, I think you're right. I tell this story when I'm doing Rusty Pilot seminars because it always gets a laugh, but it is absolutely true, and you've heard it before, Bobby. I was flying out of Brenham, this is several years ago, with a student, and I hear this radio call. We're climbing out, and I hear this radio call. Brenham traffic, Phenom 12345, 10 miles north, inbound on the RNAV 16 Brenham. Any traffic in the area, known or unknown, please advise. And it always gets a laugh, but that's an absolute true radio call. And I'm thinking to myself, am I known or am I unknown? I don't know. Now I have an identity crisis. I think
I would have said, I'm unknown traffic. I don't know where I'm at.
Yeah, the 10-year-old in me wanted to key the mic and say something probably inappropriate, but the professional in me, well, I have to admit that I keyed the mic.
All right.
Yeah.
Good. You're human.
You're human.
Yeah.
And there's a young man in there somewhere, Pat, that wanted to get out, I'm sure.
I'm telling you what, it felt so good. I said, advise you buy low, sell high.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
Well, we've reached the 30-minute mark on our recording time, so I think we'll wrap up for the listener's sake. So I know we could talk all day long, and we will have you back for part 2, part 3, part 4, hopefully, Pat.
Awesome.
Hopefully you'll be a continuous guest of the show. Anything to what you might want to wrap up with today, Wally, as we end the first guest appearance on Behind the Prop?
No, but Pat, thanks for being here.
Oh, gosh, my pleasure.
We look forward to seeing you again and often, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you, and this has been fun.
I just say rock on, Wally.
All right.
Rock on. Well, thanks, listeners, for listening to Behind the Prop today. As always, fly safe and stay behind the prop.
Bravo Tango Papa, we are clear of the active runway and would like the taxi to park.
Bravo Tango Papa, taxi to park. Great show. Have a nice day.
Taxi to park, thanks. You too, Bravo Tango Papa.
Thanks for listening to Behind the Prop. Please follow us on social media at Behind the Prop or visit our website, www.behindtheprop.com. Until next week, fly safe, everyone.